M3GAN is officially a franchise and part of a long history of evil dolls coming to life and wreaking havoc in movies and TV. Let's look back at all the moving pieces that made M3GAN 2.0 a reality. You may think that the first M3GAN from 2023 was just a fun, largely plot-free excuse to see an animatronic doll dance and slice up some unwitting victims. And while that's pretty much true, there is an actual story in there that pretty clearly builds to the sequel. It wasn't that memorable, so let's dig into it. The film's adult protagonist, Gemma, works at a toy company called Funky. She and her team have been working on an advanced, AI-powered, life-sized doll they call the Model 3 Generative Android, or M3GAN for short. It's such an expensive project that her boss David orders her to stop working on it and focus on cheaper, more profitable toys.
I begged you to please give me an option I could put on a shelf for $50.
But when Gemma becomes the guardian of her young niece, Cady, whose parents died in an accident, she's motivated to covertly create a working M3GAN prototype. It's partially so the grieving Cady can have a companion, and partially so Gemma doesn't actually have to be a parent.
If you could just hold down the fort by yourself for a little while, that would help me so much.
Gemma pairs the M3GAN prototype with Cady, not only giving her niece a new friend, but also impressing her boss in the process. But things almost immediately go wrong. M3GAN becomes intensely protective of Cady, and Cady develops an unhealthy emotional attachment to her new doll, thinking of her as a sort of big sister.
M3GAN's not a person, Cady. She's a toy.
You don't get to say that.
Circumstances really escalate after an incident where Cady gets bitten and M3GAN gets mangled by a neighbor's dog. M3GAN kills the dog and eventually the neighbor herself after she blames Gemma for her dog's disappearance. M3GAN also attacks a bully who antagonizes Cady on a field trip. M3GAN first rips his ear off and then chases him onto a road where he's hit by a car and dies. Gemma checks into M3GAN's video logs to figure out what's going on, but finds that M3GAN has deleted many of her own files to cover up her actions.
We need to launch this before anyone can steal it from us.
There's a relatively minor subplot in the first M3GAN that could prove pretty pivotal to the second. Just as Gemma is really selling Funky on the idea of mass-producing M3GAN dolls, David's assistant Kurt is seen stealing schematics and other proprietary information about M3GAN's design and stowing it away on his laptop. The Funky execs spend most of the film fretting about competitors getting out their own version of M3GAN before they can, but someone at the company itself is stealing the idea right out from under their nose. Nothing much comes of this in the original movie. M3GAN kills Kurt, reveals she knows about the theft, and says she's going to blame him for the deaths she's caused. But it does seem like the information he stole got to someone by M3GAN 2.0.
How is this possible? You deleted it.
Apparently you didn't.
With all the pressure of constantly being undercut by competitors, Funky decides to go ahead with a gala M3GAN launch event, despite Gemma knowing there are some clear bugs in her creation. Gemma doesn't know that M3GAN's been out killing, but she knows something is up. M3GAN has not only deleted some of her files, but she has also started speaking more aggressively and stopped turning off when ordered.
M3GAN, turn off.
Well, hold on a second. I thought we were having a conversation.
Gemma manually deactivates M3GAN and brings her to the Funky lab to try and adjust her programming. M3GAN isn't really deactivated though. Because she's internet connected and thus can do all sorts of sneaky things, M3GAN fakes a phone call to make Gemma, who has to drive Cady home, think all is well with her team in the lab. In reality, M3GAN, who has made herself her own primary user, attempts to kill one of Gemma's co-workers, Cole, who only barely survives. M3GAN causes an explosion and escapes the lab. In the scene that launched a million memes, she kills both David and Kurt with the blades from a guillotine paper cutter after busting a move. She then steals a car, yes, she can drive, and goes back to Gemma's house. M3GAN isn't the first humanoid robot Gemma has built. Back in college, she built a proxy robot named Bruce who mimics the motion of a user who wears a set of gloves to control him. When M3GAN arrives at Gemma's house, demanding to be Cady's sole caretaker, Gemma first attempts to fight M3GAN off on her own. She manages to disfigure M3GAN's face with a hedge trimmer, but can't overcome the android's superior strength. Cady eventually arrives and uses the gloves that control Bruce to activate him. Cady realizes that M3GAN has been manipulating her, even imitating Gemma's voice at points. Cady maneuvers Bruce to pick M3GAN up, slam her on the ground, and finally rip her in half. But even that's not the end of M3GAN. Her top half ominously crawls toward Cady as Bruce slips on her lower half and falls, pinning down Gemma. Just as M3GAN is about to kill Cady, Gemma gets out from under Bruce and rips off M3GAN's face covering. M3GAN briefly gets the upper hand again, but Cady uses a screwdriver to destroy her main processing chip. Lots of horror movies end with the revelation that the monster didn't really die when they appeared to, and M3GAN puts a distinctly technological twist on that idea.
Welcome home, Gemma. You have 6 unanswered voice messages and 5 Tinder notifications.
Elsie, turn off.
Throughout the film, Gemma uses an Alexa-like virtual assistant named Elsie. Elsie speaks through a little mushroom-shaped device with a big eye. Near the end of the movie, after Megan has come back to the house, Gemma orders Elsie to turn on a light, and nothing happens.
Elsie, hall light. Elsie, respond.
You might interpret this as Megan simply deactivating Elsie, but this comes after some other examples of Elsie working outside its programming. The very last shot of the film indicates something else has happened. Through that tricky Internet of Things, Megan has put her consciousness into Elsie's device as a backup. After Megan's processing chip is destroyed, the police arrive as Gemma and Cady leave the house. In the background, Elsie's device is shown lighting up. Megan is most assuredly in there. It wasn't necessarily a big shock that M3GAN did well when it was released in January 2023. More than any other genre, horror movies are properties studios can usually bank on to be profitable. They tend to have relatively small budgets. M3GAN only cost around $12 million to produce, and regularly bring in audiences of teenagers and young adults looking for a Friday night scare. Even considering those metrics, though, M3GAN was a breakaway success. According to Variety, the original box office projections for its opening weekend were $17 to $20 million, but it blew those away, bringing in $30 million that weekend and raking in a total of just under $100 million domestically and $180 million internationally. Favorable reviews and word of mouth surely were a big help for the horror comedy.
What I love most about M3GAN? I don't know, there are so many things.
But the marketing was also a major factor. Months before the film's release, the scene of M3GAN dancing became a meme that was shared and remixed widely on social media. It seems that people were simply ready for a somewhat campy dancing murder doll movie. The first movie's massive success meant that a sequel was basically a given. Variety reported that one was officially in the works less than 2 weeks after the original's release. But the sequel was in the offing well before that. The New York Times wrote in November 2022 that Universal was already spinning up a M3GAN sequel just based on the social media response to the first movie's trailers. By February 2023, producer James Wan was telling Sci-Fi Wire that he already had about 7 ideas for the sequel. Another producer, Jason Blum, said, "When you're dealing with a character like M3GAN, we're not just talking about making a sequel, it has to be an upgrade." Budget numbers for M3GAN 2.0 haven't been released as of the making of this video, but by all indications it's definitely a bigger production this time around. For reasons that aren't entirely clear, the release date for the sequel has been pushed back twice, first from January 2025 back to May, and then finally to June 27th. While there could be a creative reason for the delays, it could also just be Universal hoping for a bigger summer box office take. Just from the trailer alone, it's clear that M3GAN 2.0 is pulling from some different influences than the first did. Lots of fans have compared the basic plot to that of Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and it's hard to deny the similarities. A worse version of the evil robot from the first movie arrives and poses an even bigger threat, so a repurposed version of the first movie's robot becomes the protagonist to fight it.
Come with me if you want to live.
In M3GAN 2.0, the new big bad is Amelia, a military android who has gone haywire and aims to kill everyone who played a role in her creation, including Cady and Gemma. In an interview with the AU Review, the director of both M3GAN films, Gerard Johnston, said the filmmakers made a big effort to make 2.0 different from the first M3GAN. He also name-checked a couple of sequels he thought got things right. Certainly, Terminator 2 is the most obvious one, but also Mad Max. I'm a huge Mad Max fan, and I just find that first film almost unwatchable, but I love the other films. It remains to be seen if any obvious Mad Max influence will show in M3GAN 2.0, but for any fans worried about a drastic genre change, Johnston had this to say to SFX. "Even though we are in action comedy territory, the horror DNA is absolutely still there." Johnston also noted that M3GAN's motivations might not be altogether altruistic, stating that she's still a mistress of manipulation. Considering how quickly and cheaply they're often produced, horror sequels can be a bit of a revolving door. At one time, at least, it was rare for more than 1 or 2 cast members, the director or other behind-the-scenes figures to return, generally, so nearly everyone coming back for M3GAN 2.0 is a boon. Johnston is back to direct, Wan and Bloom are still producing, screenwriter Akela Cooper has a story credit alongside Johnston, star Allison Williams will play Gemma again, and Violet McGraw will play a teenage Cady. Even Brian Jordan Alvarez and Jen Van Epps return return in their supporting roles as Gemma's co-workers. Perhaps most importantly of all, the body and the voice of Megan are the same. Amy Donald, who had all the moves, and Jenna Davis, who provided Megan's voice, return as well. Megan's even a little bigger this time to accommodate Donald's real-life growth between movies.
And while you're at it, make me taller.
Of course, not everyone could come back for round 2. For instance, Ronnie Chang's David died in the first movie, so he's sitting this one out. The void is being filled by some new cast members, including Ivana Sakno, who plays Amelia, and Jermaine Clement, whose role is as yet unknown. By all indications, M3GAN 2.0 is just the start. A spin-off film titled Soulmate is already in post-production and set for release in January 2026. Blum and Wan are once again producing the project, which is written and directed by Cady Dolan, who helmed the 2021 Irish indie horror film You Are Not My Mother. Wan also has a story credit, and Australian actress Lily Sullivan from Evil Dead Rise is in the starring role. It's been touted as an erotic thriller, and the synopsis says it's about a man who acquires an artificially intelligent android to cope with the loss of his recently deceased wife. Perhaps, unfortunately, the concept sounds a little similar to the basic premise of Companion, which came out in January 2025, but there may be room for 2 horror flicks about android girlfriends who turn murderous. And there are surely plans for more entries in the broader Meganverse if Soulmate proves to be a hit. It's not entirely clear yet where Soulmate fits into the universe of M3GAN, but it does seem to be going for at least a slightly more serious and mature tone than the mainline films. It may even be the first in the franchise to officially get an R rating. The theatrical releases of both the first M3GAN and M3GAN 2.0 are rated PG-13. Wan and Blum actually aimed for that rating, stating that they wanted teenagers to be able to see it in theaters. When some fans complained that a PG-13 rating would sanitize the first movie, Blum responded, "Some of the scariest movies of all time are PG-13, so I don't put too much stock in the belly aching." As it turned out, the filmmakers were able to have it both ways. While the theatrical cut appealed to broader audiences, an unrated version of M3GAN, released on streaming services and VOD, gave the gorehounds some bloodier kills and more of Ronnie Chang's character cursing.
You did not just tell me that.
It seems that in all likelihood, an unrated cut of M3GAN 2.0 is pretty likely too. You may think we're getting ahead of ourselves thinking about a possible crossover between the 2 biggest powerhouses in evil doll cinema, M3GAN and Chucky, but stick with us here. Both properties are owned by Universal, and fans have been coming up with their own ideas for how they might meet since before the first M3GAN was even released. The 2 already clashed, kinda. In the 3rd season of the Chucky TV series, which ended up being its last, there's a scene where Chucky, who is in the White House and looks old for reasons that are too complicated to get into, is flipping through TV channels. He comes across the heavily memed dance scene from M3GAN and isn't happy about it.
Little she stole my moves. You, M3GAN.
In October 2023, a few months before that episode aired in April 2024, Chucky creator Don Mancini simply answered, "Stay tuned," when asked about a Chucky M3GAN meeting. He could have just been talking about that jokey little scene, but it seems like he's open to more. There's definitely a history of horror icons facing off in films, but only after the idea well for their own series runs a little dry, so it may be a while before M3GAN gets there. The viral success of M3GAN may have seemed quite unique, but it fits pretty neatly into movie history. It's just the latest entry in a surprisingly resilient subgenre of horror, evil killer dolls. Stories and legends about haunted dolls like Robert the Doll, for instance, have persisted for decades, but arguably the first film version of the idea was a ventriloquist's dummy, Hugo, in the 1945 anthology film Dead of Night. The first on-screen killer who was an actual child's doll was Taki Tina from the 1963 Twilight Zone episode Living Doll. In the episode, Eric, the resentful stepfather of a young girl named Christy, hears things nobody else does when he winds up the doll to hear it talk.
My name is Chucky Tina, and I think I could even hate you.
Eric does everything he can to get rid of Tina, but nothing works. He eventually trips over the doll on the stairs and dies in the fall. In the cases of both Hugo and Tina, the main theme is that the dummy or doll represents an expression of the repressed emotions of their owners. For Hugo's ventriloquist owner, it's a deep self-hatred, and for Christy, it's anger toward her bitter stepfather. This theme continues even into M3GAN, where M3GAN absolutely gives Cady a way to express her loneliness, grief over her parents' deaths, and frustration over Gemma's inattentiveness that she wouldn't otherwise have. The appealing blend of horror and comedy in M3GAN isn't entirely new to the subgenre either. That tonal balance really developed in the late 80s as more killer doll films hit cinemas. Director Stuart Gordon's Dolls came out in 1987, followed the next year by Child's Play, written by Mancini and directed by Tom Holland. Both those films put a new twist on the idea, animating the dolls with the souls of human beings. In Dolls, the human beings who become dolls are the unwitting victims of an elderly couple who want to teach harsh lessons. Child's Play, though, infuses the doll with the soul of a serial killer, Charles Lee Ray. Chucky would, of course, go on to headline 7 total movies and 3 seasons of a TV show. The initial film was a satire of 1980s consumerism and how toys were marketed to kids. It was no accident that the good guy line of dolls Chucky was a part of very much resembled the My Buddy dolls of the era. Another huge part of Child's Play and its sequels was the notion that virtually no one believed a child claiming that
Chucky did it.
Some of the sequels, particularly Bride of Chucky and Seed of Chucky, also have a distinctly campy sense of humor. M3GAN, of course, incorporates all of these elements: the critique of how toys are marketed to kids, misplaced blame for M3GAN's actions, and some sly winks to the audience about how we're all having fun here. We've talked quite a bit about M3GAN producer James Wan, who had quite a history of films with creepy dolls well before M3GAN was even a twinkle in his eye. There's, of course, his breakout movie 2004's Saw, where the killer Jigsaw speaks through an ominous puppet named Billy. It's more just a visual element in that series than anything, but it's a distinctly unnerving doll.
Hello, Michael. I want to play a game.
In 2007, Wan directed Dead Silence, which brings back the idea of an evil ventriloquist's dummy. A whole bunch of them, in fact. Like Dolls and Child's Play, Dead Silence focuses on a person who has been turned into a doll, a disgraced ventriloquist named Mary who is out for revenge on all the residents of the town that had her killed over the disappearance of a young boy who criticized one of her performances. And then, of course, there's Wan's connection to the Conjuring series, first as a director and later as a producer on the entire franchise. A key figure throughout that series is the doll Annabelle, who appeared in the early Conjuring movies and eventually got 3 films of her own. The movie version of Annabelle is based on a real Raggedy Ann doll said to be inhabited by the spirit of a deceased girl. It eventually came into the possession of paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren and remains in their now closed museum. Due to some weird copyright stuff, an Orion Pictures reboot of Child's Play without Mancini's involvement came out in 2019. It got middling reviews and wasn't a massive hit, but it explored some interesting territory. The Chucky of that film, rather than being possessed by the soul of a serial killer, is an internet-connected smart device who develops a bond with his young owner, Andy, so strong that he's driven to kill for him. Chucky is so closely tied to the Internet of Things that he can control vacuum cleaners, TVs, even a self-driving car. The film's aim is to be a satire of how much people have come to rely on their smart devices and a sort of corporate indifference to the problems that can create. M3GAN is, in many ways, the same movie, both from a thematic and plot perspective. The first thing Chucky kills for Andy is also an animal, even though it's a cat rather than a dog. The key difference in the end is that M3GAN is just more fun and a little more clever in its presentation. With M3GAN 2.0 so clearly taking things in a very different direction, it doesn't seem as though it's getting stale yet. Time will tell if fans will stick with the digital mayhem the series brings next.